Howdy everybody. So I'm going to make a shaving brush and a matching puck holder, shaving puck holder with a lid is my plan. Now I kind of jumped the gun and forgot to film how I glued these together. Now this is frog blanks. This is material you can get from frog blanks. It is dyed birch and it's glued together like ply. I will put a link in the video for the little pot that I made with the lid out of a red, white, and blue frog blanks. What I did is I cut out my circle shape for both my bowl and my shaving brush, as you can see. Now, I didn't want to waste the center of the bowl because I could use this for another shaving brush. I could use it for, you know, all kinds of things. So what I did is on my bandsaw, cut out the center of it. I used resin to glue this up, and wood glue would work just fine as well. So my bandsaw blade is real thin, and it just left a slight hole here, or a slight cut here. So when I clamped it all together, I made sure I clamped it together this way and this way when I glued it up. So I cut out the center, glued it up. I just have some cabinet scrap, maple cabinet scrap that I got out of a dumpster, or I had a friend of mine bring me a bunch of cabinet scraps, and so it could have been from that bunch. It looks like this, you know, before I cut it. I just cut out my circle to the size. So inside of here, it is hollow. But I left myself a lot of meat, so in case I wanted to change the size or shape or whatever else, I'm not restricted to just particular. You can see how much meat I have. So as far as the shaving brush goes, I did the same thing, just glued it up. Now for your plugs, your shaving plugs, I got these off of Amazon, and I noticed every time I went back to go order some more, because they were a very good price, they're not there anymore. So either whoever was selling them does not have them anymore, or they were selling them at such a low price that they had to up the price, and I just can't find that particular listing. Real boar hair. This is the synthetic. If you get the real badger hair, they will be, I mean, they're up to $30 for just the plug, just the brush. This plug here measures about 20 millimeters. So depending on how big your plug is what you're going to use to turn this around. So once you drill your hole where your plug is going to go, depending on how big it is what you can use to mount it. Now, I did have a set of a little larger plugs where my pen jaws would fit just fine inside. So it would just fit inside. This plug is not quite big enough. So, RuthNiles.com. Some of you may have heard of her. She makes bottle stuff. She's really famous for her bottle stoppers and kits and all of the mandrels and things like that to do for them. But also she sells a off-center jig. This off-center jig, I have a waist block mounted here. And I was working on practicing some medallions. You can make medallions where you can do off-center the holes and designs and everything else. It is a wonderful jig. I love it. When I get in the mood for jewelry making or necklace making, I absolutely love this. You have several different holes, so it'll be obviously off-center. Now, her mandrel piece that she uses for this system is also the same piece that she uses for her bottle stoppers. Now, this here is small enough to where it will fit in. It'll just fit inside of my brush when I go to turn it. Now, if you turn it a little large, that's fine. You can use epoxy, 5-minute epoxy to fill it. But be very careful because that glue wants to seep up in here. I wouldn't recommend using colored glue because I've done that to a few pieces, and the colored epoxy that gets into the furs shows. And I'm still trying to perfect this method. I don't make these all the time. So it's you know, as I kind of go and look at tips and tricks, obviously, of you other turners who do turn shaving brushes, and try to incorporate that with how I'm doing it. But like I said, depending on your knot is going to determine how you're going to mount it. And there might be a million other ways that you can do this. This is just what I have available to me to mount it. Now with this mandrel, it's a screw. You'll need a 5/16 tap. You're going to drill it and then tap it, so that way this will hold on. That's the method I'm going to use because, like I said, my knot is too small for my pen jaws. I'm going to have to use my Ruth Niles. I will put the link to this medallion off-center jig in the link below, along with a separate link, because she does sell these separately. You don't have to buy this all together if you only are interested in this piece. And they're very price friendly, and her products are very good, and she is awesome with her customer service. I had emailed her about some questions and she got to me right away. Very kind. I appreciate her so much. And so that's what I'm going to use. One thing I would recommend though is, so you don't get your brush all nasty and everything, I wrap mine in painter's tape. I usually put the plastic back on it, wrap it in painter's tape. Or you can take a finger off of a glove . I'm trying to explain quite a bit of this process because I'm trying to think of what questions I may or may not have to be a little bit more helpful in the process of making these shaving sets. So I apologize for the long intro, but I'm hoping that it will help some of you with some questions. I'm gluing this up to one of my waste blocks because my original intentions were to use some of this wood as the lid, but it ended up not working out. The wood that I had left over from making my cut was way too thin, so I did fashion a lid for it, but after I put it on, it looked out of balance. The lid was just way too thin, and I didn't like how it looked, so I opted for no lid. I feel like this project was one of those that I fought myself with throughout the whole process. So when I originally glued it up, I used 15-minute Total Boat epoxy, and it worked fantastic, but I walked away when I had clamped the gap closed, and my clamp slid off of the bowl, and I didn't know it, and then obviously the epoxy dried pretty quickly, and I was hoping that it was just what I was seeing on the outside, and after I turned away a layer, it would, blend a little nicer. And it's not like horrible, huge gap or anything. It's just one of those things where it's there, so it drives you nuts. So that little gap, or it's just misaligned slightly because of my clamp slipping off. So just make sure if you're going to hollow out your piece like I did to save the material, that you pay extra attention to how you clamp it. I decided to seal the wood with CA glue. I used the medium because it gave me time to apply it without it drying so quickly. I did use about 3 or 4 coats on all sides of the piece. At the very, very bottom, I didn't put any because I wanted to remount it without that glue causing any kind of like offset. So I just applied glue in the mortise that I created to hold the piece on later on. Another mistake I made with this project was, this is my old Nova chuck that had wobble that Nova replaced for me, but that new chuck had a piece mounted to it, and I didn't want to have to unmount it, and I figured, this is a smaller piece, maybe the wobble's not going to be that bad. Yeah, well, it was. So I'm trying to even out the outside and get a good shape and everything, and I'm having a real hard time trying to get a smooth cut because it's wobbles and there's nothing you can do. So I was hoping that I could just work through it and hollow out the inside without issue. But unfortunately, I couldn't hollow it out, and I was using everything that I had to hollow it out with, and was having problems. So I went ahead and just switched out my chuck and gave in, and it was a lot easier. But as you can see here, I'm using my square carbide, which this I got off of Wish and made my own handle. You can see the link in the description for it below. And it's hard to see in the video because I'm turning faster, so that way this video isn't forever long. But I'm really having a difficult time, even after getting the side smooth. It's just really, I couldn't get a good cut. Now I sanded the piece on the outside and inside all the way to 400 grit, but before I got to 400 grit on the inside, I think I stopped at 220 to add my little indents. I used a homemade diamond tipped tool, as you can see here. It's just a screwdriver, and I ground it so that way I can do detail stuff with it. So you don't want to sand too far, or you don't want to put those details in it before you do all your sanding, because otherwise you will sand them flat. And those grooves in there are designed to help hold the soap once the soap gets wet and has something to like grip onto. So I sanded to 220 and then put my little grippy things, I guess you can call it, details in the bottom, and then finished sanding all the way to 400. And then cleaned it off with denatured alcohol. I did use shellac and denatured alcohol as a sanding sealer. Some people ask me what I use for that, and it's shellac and sanding sealer 50-50. And then I gave it a good 3 or 4 coats of medium CA glue on the outside and inside of the piece really well. And it's a beautiful shine. It turned out fantastic. I opted for CA glue instead of I was going to do a resin coating on it, but the resin takes a lot longer to dry, and I wanted to get this finished pretty quickly. I did make a mistake there, and I started putting on more CA glue before it was dry. I had to sand it back. A friend of mine on Instagram named Todd at Satilla Woodcraft, he sent me some of his abrasive paste and polish and his OB Shine Juice, which all of it is a wonderful product to use, and I used it to cut back the CA finish just to level it out, to even it out. His abrasive paste is a little bit finer than what mine is, so it really worked perfect for this project. And his polish paste is a little harder wax, which is nice because it builds a really great shine, and I feel may or may not have a little bit more of a durable finish because it's more wax than it is oil. So go check him out. I'll put the links to his Instagram page below so you can contact him if you're interested in purchasing it. It is really great priced too, so I'll get you in contact with him in case you are interested. So another frustrating point in this project was when I went to tap the hole for the mandrel. I must have got some wood or something crammed down in the bottom, and it did not want to seat properly, or I should say straight. And I fooled with it a little bit, and it was the best I could get was how I mounted it. So you'll see once I turn it around, it has a slight wobble to it, and I didn't tap it by having the lathe turned on because it would go way too fast. So I just used the tailstock
pressured it in as I turned it, backed it out a few times, and it tapped just fine as far as the threads goes. It just was sitting in there crooked, so I must have done something wrong, and I never really fooled with it enough to find out what I did wrong, because I wanted to just complete the project, and I felt I had enough meat on there left over to, straighten it out once I got on there, which I did, and it turned out just fine. These shaving brushes, you can make any shape you like. There's a ton of ideas on Pinterest if you type in, shaving brushes, and I tend to like the more traditional shapes, but I do want to experiment and go, get outside of my comfort zone and do some, different ideas. There's really a lot of them on Pinterest. The bottoms of them, depending on how you're designing it, I guess, I always like to do just a slight concave, because I know with my makeup brushes, I like to be able to set them down, and I don't want them laying on the counter. It's nice to be able to sit them up and the bristles, standing up. So just keep that in mind, making sure the bottom of it's really nice and flat and slightly concave, so you don't get the center causing it to weeble wobble all over the place. I used CA glue for the finish for this as well. I put about 4 coats of CA glue. The mistake I made with this again was I didn't put tape or anything around the metal and the mandrel. Whenever I went to go take it off, I had to take a rubber hammer and just tap it slightly to break it loose. So keep that in mind when using this method. I didn't think of it because the last couple of pieces I did were all resin, so it was unnecessary to use CA glue. But just wrap it in some sort of tape or something, just so that a way you can get the handle off, make it a lot easier to remove it. I used 5-minute epoxy to glue this shaving brush on. You can use silicone adhesive. I've seen people use. I'm not sure if CA glue would work for gluing in that knot. I don't know. I just never used that method. I did decide to mix my 5-minute epoxy in those little small zippy bags that you get with your pen kits and stuff. I saved them, and this method worked out really well. I kept from having such a big mess, and I just cut a little hole in the bag like a piping bag, and I was able to squirt it in there without so much of a mess, because anytime I mix it and then put it in with like a popsicle stick, I tend to get some runs on the piece. So that method worked out really well by using the little bag. So I hope at least some of my mistakes that I made in this will help you to not make mistakes in yours and give you some things to think about. I appreciate you watching, and I pray y'all have a wonderful weekend. God bless.